I'd like to introduce Steve Garippo, Director of Client Services for Societe Generale.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you. Hello, and welcome. My name is Steve Garippo. I am a Director of ITech Client Services, as Carol said, with Societe Generale, Societe Generale. And today I'm going to share with you the history that we've had with CA Advanced Authentication, and ultimately get to the name of the presentation, basically how we implemented a advanced authentication in 30 days. This will be the overview of the things that we'll talk about. I won't really spend much time on this because you'll hear it as we go through it. So, background on Societe Generale. It's a large French bank, one of the leading financial service groups in Europe. It is got many different business units within it, as you can imagine with all big banks. And I work within the SG Americas Securities branch of the bank. And basically we're an FCM. It's an institutional sized brokerage firm. Our clients include OEMs type manufacturing companies, food producing companies, fund managers, introducing brokers which would use our services as a gateway into offering their clients the services. And so very large bank on the brokerage side. And we have exchange memberships in globally, about 60 to 70 different exchanges globally. And so just to give you a sense of the size of our organization, we do have clients globally as well, Asia, Europe, North and South America. And so that's basically our bank, this portion of our bank. And then the other thing is, as you can easily imagine, it's a highly regulated environment. We get audited internally and externally, and there's many different compliance requirements in this industry, as you can imagine as well. So security is paramount, obviously, in our industry, and I'm sure in many of yours as well. I'm going to go back and explain a little bit of the history of how we got to where we are today, and that will involve basically me going back a number of years, even before Societe Generale owned the firm that I started with. So New Edge was a firm years ago that was actually owned jointly by two French banks, Societe Generale and another French bank. And then at that time we were still an FCM, and we had the same kind of business model that we currently do within Societe Generale. We were deploying a client-facing portal that we wanted to allow our clients access to their daily and monthly statements, their trade confirmations, the typical data that a trader would need to see, cash management type functionalities that they might want to wire money, etc. And so we were doing that for years, a couple of years, with just single factor authentication, user ID and password. And we became very aware, obviously we didn't want to stay with that security model, we wanted to notch it up. It was not only for our clients' security, but as we were trying to win business on prospect customers that wanted to come and do institutional trading, they would ask us a number of RFP type questions. And one of the common questions routinely was, what is the security that you offer? So we not only wanted to bring in an advanced authentication for our own protection and our clients' protection, but it turned out it was going to be a differentiator in the marketplace compared to our competition as well. So about 5 years ago, we started searching and looking at the various products that were out there. CA obviously was one, and we were looking at RSA as another possible means to provide multi-factor authentication some 5 years ago. We looked at RSA, and basically we just couldn't go with that solution. We used it for our VPN access, many of you may, and it was very intrusive in terms of the user experience. From a developer's perspective, if you're logging in and VPN, you don't really care. For your clients, we didn't want to introduce this weird behavior of having to constantly enter in a token when they're logging into a web application. They did offer soft token generation, so it wasn't necessarily going to be like a fob that we would have had to have mailed out all over the globe to someone. But even the soft token was going to be intrusive. If they had to install a plugin on their browser, it was going to be constraining. And not to mention just the behavior of having to constantly do that. So that really got quickly ruled out as an option. We liked what we saw with the CA Arcot ID. It was very clean, almost invisible to the end user. They would get a full-time multi-factor authentication, whether they're a high-risk login occurrence or just a regular daily login, no risk. So the CA guys here can explain it all to you, but in a nutshell, the Arcot ID file has inside it a token that would be authenticated against the authorization, the advanced authorization server. When you log into like say a page that has advanced authentication, the password never goes across the wire to the server and authenticated against some database or an AD or an LDAP or something. The password is a key to unlocking, decrypting the file that has the token. And the token is sent across the wire to the server for authentication. So for us, whether the user is deemed high risk or low risk, they were always getting multi-factor authentication through this solution. And then the risk analysis and the risk engine that came with it, the risk fort, what they called risk fort in the early days, that was extremely valuable, and it has grown in its offering through the years. Users, when they log in, get evaluated at the time of logging in to determine what is their risk associated with this user. Are they logging in at the typical day, hours of the day? Are they roaming? I log in from work and then I go home and log in. That PC is unknown, that home device is unknown, and that's considered roaming and deemed a higher risk. I'll be routed to a stepped-up authentication at that point. Impossible travel. I log in from New York, I log in 5 minutes later from Las Vegas, that kind of thing. Geographic risks. Are you logging in from a location that's deemed a little risky in the globe? We learned the other day that you could exclude countries. So just outright deny login access from various countries. So the risk engine can introduce a lot of control that you can configure to meet your specific needs within your business. So in those early days, we really appreciated the CA solution and the Arcot ID technology. So at that point, we had a decision to make. Were we going to deploy their advanced authentication locally on a host and host it ourselves, or were we going to use the cloud? And 5 years ago, at that time, we deemed it to be expedient to go with the cloud solution as opposed to hosting it internally. This very speech is kind of the opposite of that. We now have it locally hosted, and we did it very quickly. So this argument wouldn't hold water today, but 5 years ago, that's kind of what we were thinking at the time. We brought in CA professional services to help us with some of the technical aspects of implementing, and obviously we had to work with their cloud developers because we had to give them our style sheets, our pages, and they had to host them on their server when they set up the flow manager. I'll get into that in a little bit here. But we did use their professional services to help integrate. At the time, we were using Oracle Access Manager to protect our resource, our URL resources. So when users would log in and they'd come to the site, OAM would intercept it, say you need to authenticate, and then it would communicate with the AOK cloud. We needed a plugin for us to work with that, and CA came in and helped us with that. We had some challenges on top of just doing the work because we were in the midst of converting from 32 to 64-bit architecture and some other things like that. Ultimately, what we ended up with 5 years ago was a WebSphere portal server using Oracle Access Manager and communicating with the AOK Cloud, getting a SAML response back through the plugin, authenticating the user. We used Active Directory as a means for permissioning, and this was what we had for the past 3 years or so, 3.5, 4 years. There were some issues early on with the cloud. We ran into a few bumps in the road, if you will. I think they were going through some growing pains on the AOK Cloud at that time. There were some, there was a router hardware, issue on their network, and it interrupted service for, I think, about 2 hours. We had occasional latency on emails with OTP delivery of tokens. I think in the past years that their cloud service has stepped up from there, but quite honestly, since we've moved beyond that at this point, I wouldn't be a very good commentator on the current state of what the cloud is like. So now we'll fast forward to last year. That was us as NewEdge, and again, NewEdge was jointly owned by 2 French banks. Last year, SocGen bought out the other bank, and so we became 100% owned by SocGen. And in fact, we don't even exist other than maybe by a brand or some name recognition. We are Societe Generale employees, and we're fully integrated into SG America's securities. And so with that came some organizational changes, as you can imagine, but the timing was really interesting too, because we decided, we'd been thinking we needed to upgrade our application, make use of better UI features, become device agnostic a little bit with our code so that we weren't so tied to browsers that were specific to desktops. And so we decided we were going to rewrite our application using different frameworks, and basically we switched away from a SQL Server database to Oracle, and we went away from Oracle Access Manager to a CAS open source solution. I think, as you watch some of the other CA presentations, there's many products that integrate smoothly into the advanced authentication beyond some of the still pieces that we've put together in our particular solution. But we came back to the same question. Do we want to host this locally, or do we want to host it in the cloud? And this time, not so much based on the early experiences that we bumped into that I told you about, but more related to that last bullet. When we wanted to make changes, last year we were NewEdge, and then we became SocGen. And when we became SocGen, there was style sheet changes, graphics, images, page layout changes. All of those things for us required that we had to go back to the cloud developers and work with them to make the changes we wanted. If you host it locally, which is ultimately where we got, you have 100% control over that, can work it into your own time frames, and with your technical team, you can achieve those things independent of a dependence on an outside source. In addition to that, our experience with the cloud didn't give us full access to define rules. And the rules are what dictate what your risk levels are and the scoring that you give your rules. So there's a lot more control and management when you host it locally, and so that's what we chose to do on our second round of advanced authentication. We moved away from the cloud and back down to a locally hosted implementation of it. So I'm going to skip over that one for a minute, I think. Okay, so we were going to use some new frameworks. We were going to use the CA Advanced Authentication still, but not on the cloud. And so now we're back to the question, are we going to do this ourselves? Are we going to let CA do it for us? Or are we going to do some combination? And based on our last experience working with the CA Professional Services and helping us write a plugin for the OAM server to the cloud, they were exceptional. They did a great job. Another thing with that is it's a case for me of being penny wise and pound foolish. So years ago, I used to work for Sybase as a consultant within their professional services branch. And this is going back to like 90, 91, 92. And we were, in the professional side, sent out to client sites that would have purchased the product and went ahead on their own and did an install because they were confident that they could manage it. And it's not a commentary on their skill set or the technical capabilities of the teams that they had. It's more an experience level. We would go in and have to fix what the other guys thought they could do on the first round. So another reason we wanted to bring in CA was to validate the design that we were going to build our solution on. We didn't want to build a house of cards. We wanted to build something solid that we knew basically CA would have given their seal of approval and said, this will work for you and it's solid. As it turns out, we worked with many of the same guys that we worked with in our first iteration 3 years ago, and partly because we specifically asked for them. They were very good in the first round, and we were satisfied, and we knew their work capabilities, and we brought them back in. And it turned out for us to be the perfect fit. So in the end, what we ended up with was a different architecture. We had no more WebSphere. We have CAS instead of the Oracle Access Manager, and we have locally hosted advanced authentication. So what did we do? What was 30 days? How did we consume 30 days? 30 days. So the first week, excuse me a minute. The first week we spent on the phone strategizing and coordinating with the CA team. We outlined how we thought we were going to use their senior architect to help validate our design. We went over the design up front anyway to make sure that we could get started and get off to a good start. We downloaded the software. We set up the test environment on Linux. We basically ran the scripts to set up the database. We use a database as the repository behind the ARCOT, the advanced authentication. So all of the data points and all of the behavior that the advanced authentication is going to capture about your user experience gets saved in a repository. And so we set that database up with the scripts that come with the package, with the product. And then week 2 came, and out came the senior architect, and he reviewed things again in person. And basically, what we did on that second week was the majority of the work. We took the out-of-the-box product for advanced authentication and basically leveraged that product to meet the 90% of the things that we needed on day 1. So what did that mean? That meant that we were maybe not going to be able to use some of the other features like IVR or SMS for your token delivery, but we can enhance and have enhanced our system since then to include some of these other capabilities. On day 1, we were satisfied to use email delivery and Q&A as a stepped-up authentication credentials to authenticate the user. So basically, straight out of the box implementation. We didn't use any custom questions or user-defined questions. We went with things that were out of the box. There's, when users enroll, there's personal assurance messages and images that you can include so that they'll recognize your site and they'll feel confident they're not at like a spoofing site or something like that. And we went with the standard images, but those are all very easy to change. All of that is real simple configuration changes. We wanted to see how quickly we could get this to function. So week 2, we did the lion's share of the work on configuring the flow manager. And the flow manager is what dictates the behavior that the user will see. When they log in and their credentials are, and they're deemed not high risk, the flow manager will allow them to enter their password, authenticate the token, and they'll be routed through the system to the pages. If the flow manager says this guy is roaming or he's an unusual behavior that's triggering a high authentication step to be taken, then the flow manager will route them to the page that will say, how do you want to receive your token? It could be through a mobile app, it could be through IVR and SMS, but it can be through Q&A and just email delivery as well. And yesterday, I was in a demo where they were showing a beta of something that is a little bit more dynamic and doesn't even require a user involvement to re-enter the token. CA is working on an idea that might work well with retail, not so much on B2B type environment, where users can basically confirm that it is them attempting to log into the page on their remote device, a mobile phone or something, and not have to re-enter the token as it would have been delivered to them. So that's kind of the thing that's nice about CA is they're not sitting back on these technologies. They're still pressing forward with all the challenges that we're seeing in the coming years with security requirements. And also to try to make it so that it's seamless for the user's experience. We want great security, but we don't want to be hindered and interrupted in our behavior as we work through web pages and various things on the internet. On week 3, basically we had the CA senior architect on site for about a week and a half. He left about Wednesday or Thursday. And we basically went further on the flow manager, configuring with our own styles, our own images. The out of the box is going to say, CA login page. So we just basically got that working. And then on week 3, we really applied our own look and feel to the pages. And so another thing is, I think I mentioned it, our site is not a retail site. We are a more or less like a B2B type relationship. So you wouldn't come to our site and request to set up an account and everything else like that. We already have a relationship with our clients, and so when we want to set them up to get started on our web page, on our site for doing the various business activities they need, we would issue emails to them through the system, and they would get an email with their user ID and then a temporary password to get them started, 2 separate emails. That Active Directory is for the initial enrollment. They come to the site, they authenticate, but then they go through the full enrollment process where they set up the credentials, their Q&A, their password, their PAM, all the rest of that stuff, and that gets, and then going forward, Active Directory is not even a part of it. It's just advanced authentication doing the authentication after that. Week 4, this first bullet's a little wrong. We did more rule refinement on the risk engine. So we refined what are the rules important to us with respect to our users' behavior. Did we want to constrain hours of the day for certain things? In certain parts of the world, in Hong Kong, for example, banking, OTP tokens have a 60-second life. It's a regulatory requirement. So we can define rules like this where we could dictate what the life of the token is for the users when they're in the high authentication environment. And then we did actually execute a DR test. It's active-active, so it was a pretty simple exercise, shut one down. But in essence, we did go through the exercise to confirm that our environment was resilient and had the high availability. It was, at that point, at the end of the month, fully functional in UAT for user validating and sign-off. So it was not even a highly stressful month. It was just very specific activities we worked through, and with the help of the CA professional services in those certain areas, that really helped expedite our efforts. So some other considerations. If I was to say what were the key features that made our efforts successful in the 30-day window, I would definitely say getting the CA professional services to come in and validate our design so that we were confident that where we were going was going to be sustainable, that we were building on something solid. And then I would say that choosing the out-of-the-box solution was extremely valuable for us in terms of saving time because it met a good solid 90% of our needs without much variation in the implementation. We could come back later and we could implement the SMS and IVR type protocols for distributing the tokens, but it didn't need to hold us up in the beginning. With respect to SiteMinder, I think that going back, and maybe if I had more voice in this right now, I think I might choose SiteMinder as opposed to the open source solution that we went with on that first round. The IDs, the user IDs is something I struggle with sometimes. I mean, it seems to make sense. Your email is very unique. And that's what you want in an ID, obviously. And it's kind of funny when a system will allow people to like enter in their initial and last name, let's say, as an ID. And then you got 2 Jim Johnsons in the world. So now what do you do? So now it's Jim Johnson 1, Jim Johnson 2 or something, and it can get clumsy. Email is very unique, and as I look at it looking back, I think that would be something that would be worth entertaining in, going forward. So again, out of the box, leveraging CA services, penny wise and pound foolish, if you want to take that away as a thought. Future considerations. CA and advanced authentication gathers tons of data about your user's behavior. And they even have behavioral analysis tools now that are growing within the product as well. And our ability to extract that data and report valuable information for our purposes, I think we have room to grow there. There's just so much data, and you need to understand what it all means. But there is, you shouldn't be needing data. It's there. It's what are you going to do with it is the real question. And then federated capabilities for authentication is another area that is intriguing that we would possibly want to consider. So CA wanted me to share with you some of these other sessions that are available to attend. None of them will be as good as this, though. I'm sure you know that. And I think that kind of wraps it up. So I do appreciate it. If there's any questions, you feel free to ask. Otherwise, I do appreciate your attention and your patience. Thank you.